He's at the School of Global Studies, University of Gothenburg, Sweden, research fellow at the Swedish Center for Studies of Armed Forces and Society. He is currently a guest professor with the Canadian Defence and Security Network at Carleton University. His research interests include Swedish and Nordic total defense planning and organization, civilian-military collaboration, and public opinion on Swedish defense and security policy. He completed his PhD in 2009, and during his undergraduate studies, he majored in international relations and political science. He also holds a master's degree in English literature. As with most of us in security studies, he has a broad range of interests, which include total defense, privatization of war and security, security studies, history of state formation, civil military relations, transformation of war, UN peacekeeping, Swedish defense and security policy. Whew. So without further ado, you, sir.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me and having me for this talk. And now I can finally get past this picture with my face on it. It's been disturbing me since I arrived. I am going to talk about bringing the people back in, war preparedness, total defense, and public opinion. It's going to be mostly about Sweden, but also some of the research projects we have are comparative. So I will be talking about the Nordic-Baltic region a bit, and some of the comparisons we've been making with Danish and Norwegian cases as well. I'm very happy to be here, actually. When I was a PhD student starting out in 2004, I was doing my PhD on privatization of security. And at that time, it was all Blackwater and Iraq and Afghanistan. I sent off an email to Professor Kim Nossel here at CIDP at the time, and I got a reply, a very kind reply, a very helpful reply, and just reminds me all the time that this is what we try to emulate as academics, to be helpful and help each other. So I'm grateful to be here in many ways. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is based on two research projects. One is on total defense organizing and civil military collaboration in Scandinavian countries, so Sweden, Norway, Denmark. And another one is for the CSMS up here, and we do commissioned studies on behalf of the Swedish Armed Forces, and it's mostly to do with public opinion on defense and security policy. So these two together will form the backbone of my talk. But we need some context first, I think. So Sweden, as you might or might not know, has gone through a number of quite significant changes in terms of defense and security policy and organizing in the past decade or so. Of course, as many other European countries, we have been through this cycle of downsizing, dismantling national territorial defense for quite some time after 1989 or 1991, whichever year you take as a cutoff date, with an increased focus on international deployments and sort of expeditionary force capabilities instead. Conscription we have had since 1901, and then we toyed around with the all-volunteer force for about 7 years. Didn't work out, so we went back to conscription, and now it's conscription with a mix of employed soldiers as well. That's quite an extraordinary big change, and it was also made gender neutral when it was brought back in 2017, 2018. This total defense concept that I'm going to talk about in a bit was originally invented in the 1940s. And so it was something that was associated with small states, small European states, and states such as Singapore, for instance. That meant the mobilization of large parts of society in order to be able to punch above your weight, basically. These were small countries with small forces that needed some way of deterring enemies that couldn't be drawn from sort of a big military. This was dismantled after the Cold War, and there was what some people will call a strategic timeout, where there was no focus on territorial national defense, and all the total defense sort of systems and structures have been binned, basically. We have, of course, seen a return of this planning and organizing since about 2015 in the Swedish case, and it's the same in the Norwegian and case as well. Finland is a bit of an outlier here. It's a historical constant. They have never abandoned their total defense or comprehensive security planning and organizing, because of course they are very much closer, or a bit closer at least. They have a land border to Russia. They've felt this insecurity all the time, so they've kept that, and that has shown. So they are, I think they are in front in many ways. Defense spending has also been increased since about 2015. Now it's tripled, and it's about 2.4% of GDP. And like Canada, of course, Sweden has also signed up for this 3.5 plus 1.5 that you can do what you want with, basically build roads or railways. And on 7th of March 2024, so not so long ago, we ended a 200+ year of non-alignment and before that neutrality, which can be debated how neutral Sweden has been, but neutrality at least in terms of policy, and joined NATO. And that's why the map now of Northern Europe or the Nordic-Baltic region looks very, very different. So of course that changes the strategic outlook and all of the things we have thought about, troop movements or things like that towards the or through the Baltic and Nordic region now looks different with Sweden and Finland as new NATO members. So with that, we look at the return of total defense for a bit, and I'm just showing you some examples here to the right. I'm coming to these pamphlets in a bit. In 2015, so at the back of the invasion or the annexation of Crimea and some of the eastern provinces of Ukraine, Sweden decided to restart total defense planning and organizing. So it's been going on for about 10 years now. So at this point, the system had been dismantled, as I said before. And in 2018, the government decided then to redistribute this pamphlet if crisis or war comes. That was a pamphlet that was also part of the original total defense system, the sort of crisis communication to the population, information about what to do in case of emergency or war. So at the bottom half, you will see the 1951 version, which is very clear in its graphics. It's very clear what it's all about. Yeah, it was of course a defense against total war and in the last instance nuclear war. The top one is the 2018 version, and it has kept some of the language of the version. So in case of attack, we shall never surrender, and so on. It's quite interesting to see because it feels right in the 1951 version. It feels a bit off in the 2018 version. Now in 2025, it feels more right again. So these things are coming back. So we can see that the law on total defense means that the Swedish concept is a war preparedness concept. So the Swedish total defense concept is a war preparedness concept. It means the combination or the combined mobilization of civil and military defense, and civil defense then being everything in society, basically, from the municipalities and individuals to the business sectors. And it's codified in law, and to the left here, you will see some of the wordings of the newest version, sort of explaining the defense concept, the Swedish defense organization, to the general public as well. Total defense has been defined as a whole of society approach to national security, intended to deter potential enemies by raising the cost of aggression and lowering the chances of success. And I think this is a good sort of basic definition of the concept. And we can think about that in terms of what it means then for a country that is quite small, and what it means when you see it as just being organized and done by one country, or in a sort of wider NATO context, for instance. What does it mean? And it involves all sectors and levels of society. In the Swedish case, we find 12 readiness sectors, designated sectors, banking, communications, economic security, all of those things, with lead agencies appointed to prepare and responsible to prepare for different types of emergencies then. The country has been divided into 6 civil defense regions or areas, where one of the 21 county administrative boards are responsible for each civil defense area. It also involves all of the 191 municipalities of Sweden, and then it involves everyone. So by law, everyone from 16 to 75, no, to 70, are by law bound to contribute to total defense in case of emergency or heightened state of alert. There has been, of course, an increased focus on defense, civil defense, and sort of raising popular resilience in different ways. And of course, this is something that is not unique to Sweden or the Scandinavian, Nordic, Baltic region. It's also with the spread of NATO's 7 baseline requirements, for instance. So it's something that we see across the board. And I know that in Canada, the whole of society approach has been discussed in different reports, and it's also in the Minds challenges from D&D, a challenge for the development of Canadian defense for the future. How Canada can use or integrate some of that thinking a bit more, perhaps. We can understand this as a sort of network. It's not a formal organization as such. Total defense is a vast network of actors and structures, and it works as a sort of multinodal governance. And it is supposed then to be designed to treat or to respond to both conventional and hybrid threats. It is an interorganizational arrangement in a way to deal with an indivisible problem, which is national security. And that also means that defense work is being spread out in society to a very much larger degree than was the case just a few years ago. So it involves everyone, for better or worse. And there are differences and similarities across the Nordic-Baltic region that we can talk about a bit later, perhaps. Okay, so to the main point here, in the interest of then returning to total defense, there has been a number of initiatives to draw people back into defense in a way. And so we can make a sort of a simple division between coercive measures and voluntary means. So among the coercive measures, we find, of course, conscription, and that is not universal. We still only conscript or take in about 10 to 15% of each cohort. So you test a bit more, and then you take the top of the pyramid, basically, and you conscript those, and you put them through the basic training and into the military system. In case of war, there are, as I said before, total defense duty, which is then a legal instrument for everyone living in Sweden, not only citizens, but also residents. So anyone residing in Sweden, basically. And there is the possibility of national service or general national service in case of a heightened state of alert or war, of course. Among the voluntary means or ways of engaging people, well, of course, military officers are voluntary in the sense that they have sought that trade, and there is also the possibility of being employed as a soldier or sailor. Reserve officer system we have as well, and the Home Guard, which is quite specific, I think, to some countries. Like it is a territorial force, but it is an all-volunteer force in a way. So we have the conscripted force, and then we have the all-volunteer bit of that, or the armed forces, which is the Home Guard. And they are typically the first responders in terms of when municipalities or regions ask for help from the military in search and rescue operations, or in missing persons cases, or for flooding, or for forest fires. It's usually the Home Guard that is called upon. And the Home Guard has seen a tremendous increase in the number of people who want to engage with the Home Guard. And the problem there has been it's taken over a year for some to get a reply to their applications. And of course, that doesn't work. If you get 27,000 applications the few first months of 2022, and then people have to wait for a year, that is not a good way of sort of engaging people. There are also 18 voluntary defense organizations that do everything from animal healthcare to radio communications. And that's also an opportunity then for individuals to join in or to get engaged. This process then is not only about sort of creating opportunities and structures, but it's very much about communication. So communicating the need to get involved. So the pamphlet, of course, that I talked about before is one aspect of that. And I think this goes on to lots of other channels of communication, such as there has been a large amount of billboards and direct communication in radio and TV advertising and other sort of web-based media as well. You can see one of the signs up to the right there. Total defense, all of us together. So it's all of this narrative around we together as a people or as a country are total defense. So everyone is involved. And of course, that also means that it is a type of rhetoric that is in a way martial. It is in a way structure that subsumes everything under the umbrella term of defense in a way. And that, of course, will have consequences for how resources are distributed and so on. There's also been a number of activities instigated to draw people in. So, for instance, there is a readiness week. It was just a few weeks ago now, and it's municipalities, it's agencies, it's the police, it's a number of actors come together to arrange different activities during this week to get people involved and to raise their level of awareness and knowledge about the system. And also then total defense awareness or knowledge in the school or on the school curricula. So from, I think from January, we will have that as an obligatory thing that students in upper secondary school need to be taught by their social science teachers. So that is also quite an interesting shift, I think, back to where we were during most of the Cold War, where this was something that was taught in the schools as well. There's also been, of course, a shift in threat perception and how that has been translated by the political leadership to the public and transmitted through various channels. And one of the most successful attempts there, I think, has been the war frame, as we have called it. So that means that we talk about war in a way that is much more present. So 2 years ago, I think, the Minister for Civil Defense says, yes, we can't rule out the possibility of war anymore. We must prepare the society for war, to look at this as war. And just a few months ago, the Prime Minister said, yes, we are not at war, but we are not at peace. So this is sort of a way of keeping the level of awareness and readiness in a way higher. And so that, if you think about that in terms of a frame alignment or framing of something, that has been partly successful because I think that people are much more aware than a few years ago. Of course, with the news and everything that is happening in Ukraine or in other places, but also that things are being done nationally to strengthen this capability of defending the territory. That is something that is much more present in people's minds now. There has been criticism of this, of course, because we can see that more and more things are being looked upon as security issues or as military defense issues. And that, of course, has consequences. So you can think about this in terms of securitization of a number of areas of fields that usually are sort of politics as usual, but are now sort of talked about in these terms. And you can also see actors moving to become associated with defense that were not associated with defense before, because there is money in defense and because there is resources to be had. There has been a lot of focus on recruitment messaging from parts of the armed forces, like the Home Guard, but also more civil defense organizations. And that, I think, has been also partly successful, although the Swedish Armed Forces, like the Canadian Armed Forces, are struggling with recruitment and retention just as much. So in order to grow, we need more people. Well, we can select, because we have conscription, we can say that, yes, well, we just select 1,000 more then, but it's not possible because we don't have the officers to train them. So there is a backlog, if you will, or inertia in the system that we need the officers first before we can take in more soldiers. And so that is going on now, and there is an increase in the number of people accepted into the officer training programs and so on. But it's going to take time, and I think the politicians are not always perhaps so very patient. Okay. Do people agree? What do people think? So if we switch perspective from what the politicians have done, what is done in terms of projecting this new, this reinvented total defense system, what do the people think? Well, we can think about this in terms of legitimacy, or we can think a bit about this in terms of public support for different policies. And of course, it is a reaction in a way to these exogenous shocks. If we say that 2014 was one such event with the annexation of Crimea, with the annexation of or the intrusion into parts of Ukraine, and then the full-scale illegal invasion in 2022 was another such exogenous shock that people reacted to in a way. And a number of domestic factors as well. I mean, the recruitment system that we have, the ways in which people are drawn into defense, and the decisions made from 2015 and onwards that has to do with defense will, of course, also play into the level of support, or the level of legitimacy that these decisions enjoy by the public. So we have done research on public opinion on defense and security for about 15 years, but I will show you some time series that go way back to 1986, so we can see how the things have sort of changed and shifted over time. And we can say that in general, in Sweden, there has been quite a great agreement, level of agreement, or a high level of agreement, or concordance, as Schiff would put it, on matters of defense and security in the past maybe 5-6 years. People did not like the all-volunteer force. People liked the conscription. People liked the idea of increasing defense spending. And people eventually liked the idea of NATO as well. But we'll look at that a bit more. I'm going to turn to the NATO public opinion first, and the yellow lines are to describe, or to just mark, these two periods in time where we can see, or we can guess, that shifts happen because of these external factors. So for a very long time, public opinion on NATO membership in Sweden was a non-issue. There was a lot of people in the middle that were undecided. They didn't have an opinion about NATO membership, about 40% for a very long time. And then things started to happen around after 2014, just before, after 2014, that this became more of a thing. And it had to do both with things happening outside of Sweden, so the annexation of Crimea, but also a kind of civil military crisis in Sweden. The Supreme Commander, which is the CDS in Canadian parlance, I think, the Supreme Commander said in an interview in 2013 that the armed forces could defend limited area of Sweden, like Stockholm, for instance, for 1 week. That was the extent of their capabilities at the time. And of course, this became a massive discussion in the media, and he was criticized for meddling in politics, of course, and politicians were haunted by this statement for many, many years afterwards. But it became quite apparent that national territorial defense was something that we had abandoned, basically. It wasn't there in 2013. So that, together with the annexation of Crimea and other things, led to this shift, I think, in public opinion around 2014, 2015. And then, of course, we have the events of 2022, where there was a massive shift and a very quick shift. The Swedish government in February 2022 had said that we will stick with non-alignment, military non-alignment. It has served us well. It will continue to serve us well. So we'll stick with that. In May the same year, Sweden applied for NATO membership. So it's quite a dramatic shift to say that, yes, we will stick with non-alignment, or we will join NATO. And I think there were several things that played into this. Of course, the invasion of Ukraine, but also the decision of Finland, because Finland are always a bit ahead. They have their application ready in the drawer, just throw it in. It's time. We do it now. And Sweden were more or less bound to Finland in terms of bilateral defense cooperations and followed suit. And then Turkey didn't want us to join for a bit. And they eventually let us in the door, and now we are there. Okay. So that was the NATO public opinion, and it's been quite stable. So even if we look at the public opinion polls that are being done now, sort of in the periods from when we became members, it's still a high level of support for NATO. So the next big consequential issue is defense spending. We've been asking about that as well. Here you see the graphs from 1986 and onwards, and the shifts that we see are quite similar. So in 2014, there was something happened, and we might say that this was a reaction to this exogenous shock as well. And we can say that in 2022, there was the same kind of movement to be more accepting or to dislike decreasing defense spending more. What we see now is a little bit of a shift. We don't know if this will be a trend or not, but there is less support for or more support for decreasing defense spending. So we have reversed these questions as well, asking about should we increase defense spending, and the results are basically the same. Okay, so if we move then to the last bit of public opinion stuff, we will look at the question of confidence in the armed forces and in NATO, because if we had this crisis in 2013 with a low level of support, perhaps at least a number of people, or the share of population that had a low level of confidence was higher then. We have seen a slight increase over time. All the time, the general confidence in the military has gone up. And of course, this is not an easy thing to interpret. If you have a situation where the Supreme Commander says we can defend a portion of Sweden for 1 week, and then you know how long this takes to rebuild military capability, and you still see confidence increasing, what is going on here? So confidence in public institutions, as we know, is a tricky thing. So for explanations, we have to look at both the sort of assessment that people make of the performance of these institutions, but also factors like the relative importance of that institution and the alignment of that institution with societal norms. So these two latter things, I think, helps us better to understand why this increases over time. It's not an assessment of performance in defense as such, perhaps. And the same with NATO, because Swedes know very little about NATO, still know very little about NATO. So I think if we want to understand why this keeps increasing, I think we need to look at the question of feeling that defense is an important thing right now. And that's why you have a high degree of confidence. If we turn the question around a bit and say, do you think that the Swedish armed forces would be able to defend the country? The figure is much lower. So the confidence is a complex thing. But of course, this type of result is always going to be used by politicians and others to legitimize their own development or their support or their legitimacy in society. Okay, so all this taken together leads me to some conclusions based on these two projects. So in theory, and because this is a discussion that is ongoing here as well, total defense or comprehensive security, or there are other names for this as well, makes it possible to mobilize substantial parts of society and resources and different types of expertise, because it's coming increasingly clear that we cannot rely on traditional defense institutions to resolve the whole spectrum of traditional and hybrid threats for us, because we need the business sector, we need expertise from the banking sector, we need all kinds of different actors and structures in order to respond to what is now being developed as threats for us. And the sheer number of actors and structures make these things, these networks, very, very difficult to govern and to point in one direction. Our studies have focused quite a bit on total defense collaboration, and especially collaboration across organizational and professional boundaries. And that is also a challenge. Civilian and military institutions are sometimes very well prepared to work together, not always. So there is sometimes a lack of trust, especially if you go to institutions or parts of society that are not used to working with the military. You will find a lack of trust. You will find that they speak different languages. You will find that they make different interpretations of the rules and the mandates they have. And there is friction around leadership and who is in the driver's seat, so to speak. So these things are not very easily resolved. It also takes time. And as I said before, politicians don't have time. They want this to go very quickly. And so I think we will have to see we will have to be patient about these processes on the ground, so to speak. Of all the actors involved, I think the biggest challenge, at least in the Swedish context, is the involvement of business actors. They have different incentives, of course, to be involved or not. They feel that there should be something in there for us if we should contribute to defense or the total defense effort. So it's going to have to be perhaps not maximize profit, but at least we must be able to make a living if we contribute to these efforts. And that's not been resolved. There are some structures on the national level, like a forum for exchange between the political military elite levels and the business sector. And those businesses that are sort of used to working with defense issues, so the defense sector, the security sector, they are quite far advanced in getting involved with the political actors. But those who are now also involved in defense, like food producers, water sanitation companies, they are still very new to the whole idea of thinking in terms of defense and resilience. So that will take more time still, I think. The comparative aspect here is that we can see again that Finland and Norway are more advanced in dealing with contracting and dealing with long-term commercial actors or commercial relations with commercial actors in their total defense or comprehensive security apparatus. National approaches to this idea of total defense are quite diverse and multifaceted. And to understand this, I think we need to look both at internal socio-historical trajectories, institutional, ideational legacies, but also how states have interpreted what has happened in the world differently and what steps they have taken in order to rebuild or to reinvent or to try to increase defense capabilities. And the public support for these changes, quite easy to understand because people are worried, people are afraid of what is going to happen. That does not mean that they are willing or able to participate in these activities that state level actors want them to. So be drawn into these voluntary ways of being involved in defense. It is not the same for people to be willing to engage as it is for them to sort of support the general idea of total defense or defense spending, for instance. I think we understand quite a bit about the reinvention of total defense and what is being done to draw people back in, but there are still many areas where we can ask more questions. And especially in countries where there is no previous tradition of this kind of thinking, there is a lot of there are a lot of questions to be asked. There are, of course, recruitment retention issues and what happens to defense and defense expertise when you sort of disperse that into wider, in wider societal circles as well. This will have to have an impact, or this will probably have an impact on how we think about and talk about the military profession, of what the military is supposed to do, what is their core mission in relation to, for instance, civil defense, and how we think about legitimacy of both voluntary and coercive means or measures. I think we need to look at collaboration issues in practice, whether there be in relation to crisis management or forest fires, whatever, what we can learn from collaboration across these sectoral professional boundaries in practice, and try to implement that in how we develop defense capabilities in the future. I also think that this idea or this question of the market actors will be a key for the future. For Sweden, I think the next big thing will be how do we integrate all of this with our new role as NATO members? So how are these ideas being discussed among allies? What does it mean for defense, for collective defense or for defense collaboration, both bilateral collaborations between countries bordering each other, so Sweden, Norway, for instance, or Sweden, Finland, and that sort of Arctic bit of Sweden as well. How is that going to be influenced by the fact that we are now NATO members? So there are many questions for the future, so it's up to you to answer them. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, as per our standard operating procedure, we'll go to questions. I have one online already from an online viewer. Indicate to me that you have a question, raise a hand or whatever, and I'll get the microphone to you and off we go. Yeah, the microphone's online.
I think at the end of World War II, Japan did a total defense system. And when the Americans encountered this in Okinawa, their losses were horrific. They concluded it would be 1 million dead Americans to invade Japan. So instead, they decided to bomb it. That one of the justifications of nuclear weapons was their defense is so dense, we can't afford to invade them. So that's where the civilian or this total defense structure actually backfired, and it caused the enemy to use more horrific violence than not. That was one question about the backfiring of this kind of system. And the other one is, you've mentioned a lot about Finland and Sweden. Both countries in their history had wars with Russia. I never knew this until I was at a Barents Region Security Development Conference in Umeå, and there were Russian delegates there. This is in the 1990s. And Umeå had Russian soldiers there. The Russian army had been in Sweden at part of King Charles XII Great Northern War against Russia. So maybe this urgency in Finland and Sweden is playing into a history that most people in the room probably don't know about.
We'll take one question at a time.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, it can backfire. But I think what people are now trying to learn from is the experiences from Ukraine. So their ability to mobilize large parts of society and to sort of reinvent as they go along, or to invent as they go along, a sort of total defense system has been what has kept the Russians, well, relatively unsuccessful, I would say. So backfire in that sense would mean that, okay, the Russians tire of sending in more infantry and decide to do something else. Of course, that could happen, but I think the resistance capabilities of the Ukrainian people is still showing to be. As to Sweden, Finland, yes, of course, the history of wars against Russia and Russia as the arch enemy of both countries is going to play into how they react to any movement, any signal by the Russian leadership. Yes, that is very true. So I think we need to have an eye on history as well as we try to look at the future and what these countries might be responding to. A very interesting case, of course, is going on in northern Norway, with large Russian minorities in some of the villages up in Norway, where the sentiments against Russia is totally different from the south of the country. So there's a big support for Russia in some of these communities. And so, of course, there are similar things going on in the Baltic states as well, Russian minorities. That is going to be a challenge for the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I am interested in the business aspect that you mentioned as a particular challenge. And Sweden, I'm not familiar with what percentage of the business is essentially Swedish owned and Swedish operated. Certainly in Canada, we have a heavy dependence on another country which has quite a few branch plants and influence on Canada. So I'm just wondering, you have a challenge in Sweden with business. Would you expect a greater challenge for Canada to engage business leaders and business organizations into some similar program? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I think that at the moment, there is a promise of huge amounts being spent on defense broadly in Canada and as well as in Sweden, which will, of course, attract businesses. But are they the right types of businesses? That, of course, will be the question. And that will depend on how dependent one is and wants to be on a country very close to your own country. So I can't say, but my guess is that will be a tricky thing to resolve. I know that in the Swedish case, a big discussion before sort of the invasion of Ukraine was around ownership of critical infrastructure. So companies, shell companies coming in and buying ports or parts of ports and other installations that then were sort of out of the hands of Swedish control in a way. That was a big discussion, and that plus minerals and other resources will be the biggest question. I mean, Sweden we're a small country in comparison to Canada with small resources, but still there is that resource control that is going to be tricky. In terms of contribution to total defense, I think for Sweden, it's been both a matter of getting businesses interested, but also systems like the public procurement system is not rigged for long-term relationships and is not rigged for covering the whole spectrum from peace to war. So that has to be rejigged in order for this to work. And I think companies are generally well-intended and sort of positive to work, but the system is not rigged for that at the moment. So maybe that's the same in Canada, I don't know. Thanks.
I'm just going to go to one of the online questions here first. This is from Ryan Jerkowski, a fine Canadian Army dude who's currently doing his PhD over at RMC, that other place. Thanks for the great discussion. I always appreciated working with the Swedish military in the past and continue learning from you today. My question is, while you alluded to this near the end of the chat, total defense in Sweden seems to rely on mobilization, both the population and institutions under stress. What are the biggest challenges you see in sustaining citizen motivation for defense in a prolonged crisis? And how do you keep it from becoming symbolic rather than practical?
That is a great question. It's like the $50 million question, yeah? If I could answer that, yeah. But of course, that is the challenge, and it's going to be the challenge if something happens. What we can draw lessons from, I think, is not, of course, the extreme stress of armed conflict, but we can draw lessons from crisis management operations that have involved most of these actors. So like big forest fires, and you've had them certainly here in Canada, have them here in Canada as well. And what can we learn from these collaborative arrangements, how they work under stress in these circumstances, and how sort of resilient are people over time. And there's no real good way of testing this, but I think those are the sort of closest thing we come to a lab where we can actually see what is going on and how that might play out in the future. I think, yeah, that's a very, very difficult question that I don't have the answer to.
Officer Cadet Goodyear. So, give me a second to put my thoughts together. But when I look at perception of threat, in Sweden, the threat is very real because Russia is a very close neighbor. So if I stay on the topic of using a total defense system in Canada, how would the fact that the threat is a lot more overseas and we're in a lot less like contested region, how would that affect like the effectiveness of employing a system like that, or how eligible people are to participate in it? Like what I'm thinking right now is that like the United States and Canada in World War II, yes, there's a lot of participation, but it's like because the threat was overseas and to know anything about was having to rely on the news or like Postmates from people that you knew at war, like how drastic is the effect of proximity on the effectiveness of the system?
Thanks. That's a great question. I think proximity is important for the immediate effect it has on public opinion and sentiment of being afraid or feeling threatened. But it's also maybe not decisive. It's a pedagogical challenge on part of the political leadership to be able to explain to Canadians then, if we say on that topic, why are we engaged in Latvia? What does it have to do with our national security more immediately? How is the Arctic security complex play into our everyday lives? And of course, what is happening out there is one thing, but it's also possible to point to things that are going on with disruptions and misinformation and daily attacks against IT systems and all of that. That is also part of the security challenges for society. And that can also be used to motivate people to engage, to motivate the creation of systems to address these threats as well. So I don't think it has to be proximity to war or to that kind of sort of the most extreme cases, but the full spectrum of threats and security problems can also be used to sort of create new systems and new types of responses that go sort of beyond the usual suspects of the armed forces or ministries of defense or something like that.
Thank you. Fascinating talk. I want to go back to the Supreme Commander's claim that it couldn't defend Stockholm for more than, I think you said, a week, something like that.
Yes.
That's an extraordinary claim, clearly a very political claim. Do you recall what that same commander thought Kyiv would last after February 2022?
Time,
How long would Kyiv last, in his opinion, or do you recall any consent? Because I think in Washington the claim was 3 days, 4 days at the most, something like that. Do you recall a similar projection in Sweden at that time?
Yeah. First of all, there were two different Supreme Commanders. So Sverker Göransson, that was the Supreme Commander with the 1 week defense. That became his legacy, one could say. Yeah. And then he stepped down and another one came in. So there was not the same people making the assessments. Of course, he didn't make the assessment himself, but yeah. So Mikael Budén, who was his successor, I can't remember what he said about Kiev actually, but the statement was, of course, intended as poking the politicians in the eye very clearly and saying it's time to wake up. If you want us to do territorial defense, it's time to wake up. And I think we've seen some interesting discussions around that since, but now everyone is on board on throwing money on territorial defense. It's not a problem anymore.
My question is about ownership of critical infrastructures in Sweden, and what is the situation right now with the ownership of critical infrastructures, and what tools would the Swedish government implement if there was no cooperation with these critical companies?
Thanks. Good question. And I know there are now there are laws being devised or regulations being devised on ownership, but they're not implemented yet. So I can't really speak to the effect. I can only speak to say that, okay, the politicians have now moved from, oh, this is a problem, to, are we going to do something about it? but it's too early to say if this is going to be successful or not, and what happens to the things that are already sold off. We don't know. So, but that's, I think, is going to be with us for quite some time, the ownership of critical infrastructure and that type of influence. It's both about communications and you know, railways operators and all of these things. So it's quite a complex thing. I don't know.
I have another online question from Anish Rana, who I don't know. How has the Swedish military tried to learn from the war occurring in Ukraine in terms of tactics being used and or new technologies such as the effectiveness of drones being used and maybe being integrated into the Swedish military? Additionally, has the total defense system and specific responses to various situations changed as a result of their system, or has it stayed stagnant from the 1900s?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think all militaries, Western militaries are trying desperately to learn very quickly from what is going on in Ukraine and implement new tactics, equipment, and Sweden is different in that sense. I think one of the biggest things we have seen change is the status and use of the Home Guard. So both the level of equipment given to the Home Guard, it used to be the trope used to be old men barbecuing in the woods and shooting rifles. That was the sort of Dad's Army sort of vision of the Home Guard. It's now been through a number of years of professionalization and also being deployed internationally for the first time with this Operation Interflex, training Ukrainian forces in the UK. And also in terms of the equipment with drones and being most often the first units to appear, they need to have those capabilities in terms of technology. So that's one very clear example of quick adaptation, I would say, in terms of that question. And now I've forgotten the other question.
Additionally, has the total defense system and specific responses to various situations changed as a result, or has the response system stayed somewhat stagnant?
Oh, yes. Well, in a way, the system has not been tested in a sense. It's not been fully mobilized, and I think what we are seeing now is that if we look at historical versions of total defense, it's been designed to resolve different issues. So total war, nuclear war, and different types of threats. Now it's designed or being redesigned to work both with conventional threat of war, but also the whole spectrum of gray zone activities and hybrid threats. And whether it is working, yes, we can say in some instances it is working, and in other ways our enemies are very quick and agile to sort of reinvent the ways in which they try to destabilize society as well. I think one aspect that has been successful is the countering of misinformation, disinformation campaigns. So that I think not only, but partially down to the Psychological Defense Agency and their work with educating both politicians and institutions about these influence campaigns and how to counter them. So in a way, it's trying to reinvent itself to be useful for a new time, but we don't really know how that is working yet.
And disinformation, are you focused primarily on Russia? Or are you also having issues with China, Iran?
Yes, all of them, yes.
Great presentation, and I spent a lot of time with the Swedes as well. Very professional force, and I was just talking to my son, and the Swedes just put a beating on the Canadians in a little battle group exercise over in Latvia. So a little bit about the national focus on procurement. I mean, you know, one of the challenges that we've had in the Canadian forces is we do not procure equipment fast. And, you know, we're now going through a process of trying to create a new agency to speed it up. Our prime minister's got some tremendous ideas. I always found that the Swedes were pretty quick, and I could be wrong, but you always got equipment faster than us. You always had better equipment than us. So, I mean, just how much did this factor in with your prime minister on, you know, the future of Sweden's capabilities?
Yes, thank you. I think that the explanation is partly historical and has to do with neutrality and non-alignment and being self-sufficient, militarily self-sufficient, and building up for such a small country a vast defense industry, really. And I think Saab is still number 30 something in terms of, and it's quite big for coming from this small country. Of course, many of these companies have been sold off, and BAE System are the big owners of Swedish defense industry right now. But I think that's the legacy we now have in terms of being perhaps able to draw on some of that expertise and some of that know-how, and some of that industry is still operating in Sweden. So perhaps that's to our advantage in a way. I think that in terms of procurement, it's not my area of research or anything like that. But I think what is being discussed in Canada now is, should we have one unit or one point where procurement is done? Yeah, that's what I'm hearing at least. And we've had that, and it works okay, but it's not perfect. So I think this is another area where we can learn from each other, I think, in terms of both how we produce, but also how we procure military equipment for the future battlefield or whatever.
Thank you. I noticed talking about total defense. I mean, when Canadians, the average Canadian citizen, hears about total defense and sees that it's actually being implemented in a country as small as Sweden, it doesn't relate to anything we know. I mean, it may as well be Mars, because the Canadian concept, there is no Canadian concept as we know it of total defense. You know, with the increase in the defense, the massive increase in the defense budget that's coming down the pike, I don't think most Canadians have actually understood the effect that that's going to have on the country. I mean, just simply to pay for it. And, you know, when you talk about also things like conscription, even in the middle of a war, like World War II, tore this country apart, right? 1944. So I'm just wondering, what kind of earthquake would it take among the Canadian citizenship here to actually start thinking about, or do we even want to think about, total defense? And one more, like, with all the billions and billions of dollars that are coming down the pipe towards defense, if the population is not behind it, if the population doesn't accept the reasons that they're going to be forced into more austerity to pay for this, what's the point? I mean, you're just you know, F-35 fighters, well, that's kind of off somewhere else. If the people, citizens here, you know, if I said to the young people here, how many of you are prepared for conscription? Whoop, all right, not too many. Yeah, me too. Me too, but I'm too old. But I guess the question is priorities, and the first priority, as far as I can see, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, the first priority is to do some seeding among the people, to ask and to try to get some buy-in on national defense, and especially as it applies to total defense. Thank you.
Yes, and I tried to say that before, but I think I don't think that this type of arrangement requires conscription. I think it can be done without conscription. So, yes. So this book I'm plugging here on the right, it's a description or with 10, 15 cases of total defense-ish organizations in different countries. Some are far advanced and some are less far advanced. And I think the discussion that is ongoing in many other countries that are not contemplating, going full on conscription is how do we create a whole of society approach to defense that does not involve conscription or changing to these coercive measures, because there's no tradition of that in this country. There's no tradition of that in this country, or we abandon that. We don't want to go back. I mean, it comes up in different countries at different points in time. In Canada, I know that civil service has been discussed. In Germany, they've been talking about reinstating conscription as well, but nothing has happened so far. So that might be something that is going on to happen in the future. But maybe there are new voluntary means. I think you are right. People must see the utility of these millions or billions. So in terms of making it useful for crisis management, making it useful for something that is more like the everyday stability of society that people can actually see and feel that, okay, I can buy into this because it resolves some other issues. So there's a dual use of the military in terms of responding to crisis and being able to defend the territory if need be. Maybe that's a way forward. And I also think that you are clearly right that there has to be some kind of popular buy-in and legitimacy and support for these massive amounts of money now being funneled from somewhere to defense. So people will always ask about where is this somewhere that we are taking the money? Is it education? Is it healthcare? Is it somewhere else? Or are we just borrowing from the future from our children, basically? Yeah. Where did you find the money? Yeah, that's a good question, I think.
Pretty much finishes off our time. Please join me in thanking.